Good afternoon. Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security will come to order. Without objection, the chair may declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the priorities of TSA and the agency's budget request for fiscal year 2024. I would like to thank our distinguished witness, Administrator David Bukowski, for joining us today. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Welcome, Administrator Bukowski. Today, we will discuss the Transportation Security Administration's fiscal year 2024 budget request. But first, I would like to congratulate you on your recent confirmation for a second 5-year term to lead the TSA. This committee is deeply appreciative of your willingness to continue to serve. Your testimony today comes at a time where our country and the traveling public rely on the capabilities of the TSA now more than ever. The TSA was formed nearly 2 decades ago tasked with extensive responsibilities, including protecting our nation's aviation and transportation systems. As you know, the challenges and threats facing our nation's aviation and transportation systems are ever-changing and complex. During your first term as TSA Administrator, you worked diligently to realign TSA's strategic priorities and reorganize the agency to reflect the evolving mission needs. The more than 60,000 men and women of today's TSA play a crucial role in keeping our country safe and secure. It is the responsibility of Congress to ensure that TSA and its workforce have the necessary resources to address various challenges and threats and keep Americans safe. With that said, TSA's 2024 budget request includes $1.1 billion for pay increases for TSA workforce. While I am supportive of the TSA workforce, many members of our committee would prefer to take a targeted approach with potential pay increases. A targeted approach would ensure that only frontline TSA personnel are getting a pay increase. Instead, TSA is proposing a pay increase across the board, including for already highly paid senior personnel at TSA headquarters. Last month, the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security held a markup for fiscal year 2024 Homeland Security bill. Included in that bill is a targeted pay increase for transportation security officers and a total of $5.9 billion for the frontline screening workforce. This is an $856 million increase above fiscal year 2023 to fund pay increases for TSOs, which I support. I want to emphasize that funding constraints, including TSA's top-line pay equity request, have led to continued delays in investing in new, more effective security technology given the current fiscally constrained environment. TSA's fiscal 2024 budget request diverts funding from key areas such as much-needed investments in security technology. Investments in security technology such as computer tomography and credential authentication technology, CAT, must remain a top priority as a cost-effective, proven solution to decrease risk to the transportation system. We must also ensure that TSA is being proactive in shortening the time it takes to develop and pilot new technologies and deploying them in the field. TSA's fiscal 2024 budget request includes only $70 million to procure additional CT systems. This is significantly less than the amount that was appropriated in fiscal year 2023. Under TSA's fiscal 2024 request, and based on past, present, and current projected funding, TSA will not meet full operational capability for CT machines until fiscal year 2042. It goes without saying that's a little bit slow. Fortunately, the House Appropriations fiscal 2024 Homeland Security bill includes $105.4 million for CT systems, which makes up to $30 million shortfall from TSA's budget request. Thank you once again for being here, Administrator Bukowski, and I look forward to your testimony and answers. I will now recognize the ranking member of our committee, Mr. Thompson from Mississippi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Mr. Administrator. Good seeing you. Hope all is well. Thank you, Chairman Jimenez, for holding this hearing, and to Administrator Bukowski, as I said, thank you for joining us today. I'm thankful for the steps that you've taken to expand workplace rights and critical pay increases for TSA workers who've long been left behind. Those steps were made possible by the historic funding provided by Democrats in last year's omnibus spending bill. With 30% pay increases set to hit paychecks next month, TSA has already seen a drastic decrease of 40 to 50% attrition among TSA workforce. And I might add that as I've traveled through airports, I've never seen so many smiling faces. The TSOs deserve it. They've done a wonderful job in spite of the low pay. And I'm happy that we were able to start the process, but as you know, we need to finish it too. So higher pay will enable TSA to keep us during this busy summer travel, save money on training new personnel, and increase security by keeping TSOs with security and expertise within the agency. I know some of my colleagues across the aisle want to limit these life-changing pay increases to only frontline airport checkpoint screening personnel. This misguided attempt to protect the workers who need it most would actually deny much-needed equity to explosive specialists, canine handlers, federal air marshals, cybersecurity experts, and other work essential to TSA's mission. It would also disincentivize career advancement and rob TSA of experienced veteran leaders among its workforce. It is absolutely vital that we work with our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee to finish what we started and fully annualize these pay increases and safeguards for workplace rights for all TSA workers. I support the additional $1.1 billion requested by President Biden to cover these initiatives for a full year in fiscal year 2024. We cannot go back on a promise to the hardworking men and women of TSA. Congress must consider all possible solutions to this funding challenge, including increasing passenger security fees that have remained stagnant for many years, despite inflation and increases in airline ticket prices. This is why I've introduced the Fund the TSA Act to provide TSA with the resources it needs to invest in its workforce and the next generation of screening technologies by enacting a modest increase to passenger fees and indexing future fee amounts to inflation. This legislation would also end the diversion of security fees, returning to TSA approximately 1/3 of fee collections that have been taken away to offset unrelated government spending. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from Everett Kelly, President of the American Federation of Government Employees, in support of the Fund the TSA Act and full pay and labor rights for TSA workers. I'd like to thank Administrator Petoskey for his support for the TSA workforce and for his work to safeguard American travelers. I look forward to hearing more about his plans for the coming fiscal year and for the future of the agency. Thank you, and I yield back.
Without objection. And I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Thanadar, for his opening statements.
Thank you, Chairman Jimenez, for calling today's hearing, and thank you to Administrator Pekoski for joining us. We stand at a critical junction for the Transportation Security Administration as we in Congress consider whether to invest the resources necessary to ensure the continued security of our transportation system. Last December, Democrats in Congress provided significant resources in the omnibus funding bill to increase pay and collective bargaining rights for TSA workers, finally putting them on equal footing with other federal employees. Increased pay will begin to hit TSA employees' paycheck next month, and TSA is already seeing major positive impacts. Drastically more people are applying to TSA positions, and trends indicate that TSA's attrition rates, which have been unsustainably high, may drop as much as 50% under the new pay structure. Lower attrition will not only allow the agency to save millions on hiring and training employees who leave months later, but will also improve security as TSA develops a highly skilled, experienced workforce. Going forward, we must provide TSA with the funding to continue these critical workforce initiatives for a full year in 2024. Yesterday, the House Appropriations Committee marked up the bill put forward by the Republican majority to fund the Department of Homeland Security for 2024. I was glad to see that Republicans are now following Democrats' lead to provide pay increases for transportation security officers or TSOs. Unfortunately, the bill prohibits increased pay for any TSA employee who is not a TSO. This group of employees is critical to TSA's security mission and includes federal air marshals, canine handlers, bomb technicians, cybersecurity experts, and intelligence analysts. The bill also defunds visible intermodal prevention and response teams, which are essential to securing mass transit and other transportation modes. And it defunds basic collective bargaining rights for TSA employees. Simply put, this Republican bill would seriously undermine TSA's security mission. Thankfully, an alternative approach exists. Last month, Ranking Member Thompson introduced the Fund the TSA Act, which would end the diversion of passenger security fees and raise fees by $2 per trip to provide TSA with the resources it desperately needs. This bill would allow TSA to invest in its workforce, process increasing number of travelers, purchase additional computer tomography machines for screening carry-on baggages, and fund critical airport law enforcement and canine programs. I'm a proud co-sponsor of this bill, and I encourage my Republican colleagues to give it serious consideration as a solution to TSA's funding challenges. The fact is, we have been underfunding TSA for 2 decades. It is time that we right-size TSA's budget, support its workforce, and set the agency up to address rising passenger volumes over the coming years. Mr. Administrator, I look forward to hearing your thoughts and how Congress can support the agency's needs. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Thinadar. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. Again, I am pleased to have a distinguished witness before us today on this critical topic. I ask that our witness please rise and raise his right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee of Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. I would now like to formally introduce our witness. Mr. David P. Pekoski is currently serving his second term as the 7th Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration. In this capacity, he leads a workforce of over 60,000 employees and is responsible for security operations at nearly 440 airports throughout the United States. Under his leadership, TSA has improved transportation security through close partnerships and alliances, a culture of innovation, and the development of a dedicated workforce. Prior to his tenure at TSA, he served as the 26th Vice Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, culminating a Coast Guard career that included extensive operational and command experience. I thank the Administrator for being here today. I now recognize Administrator Pekoski for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Jimenez, Ranking Member Thompson, Ranking Member Tanadar, distinguished members of the subcommittee. I am grateful for the opportunity to testify on the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request for TSA. I look forward to discussing how the budget request supports our mission of securing the nation's transportation system while ensuring the freedom of movement of people and cargo. Our operations are conducted by an incredible team of TSA employees, both public-facing and behind the scenes, who work tirelessly to keep us safe, as well as the enormous security contributions of the owners and operators of transportation infrastructure. So far in fiscal year 2023, 550 million travelers have been screened at our checkpoints at over 430 airports across the country. Our highest passenger screening day since March of 2020 was just 6 days ago, last Friday, when we screened approximately 2.79 million passengers. We project that we'll screen over 250 million passengers and crew during the busy summer travel season. With the growth in air travel, we will need the additional staff requested in the FY24 budget to continue to meet our passenger throughput standards. And thanks to the extraordinary effort of our airport teams, we meet those standards over 95% of the time nationwide. Of note, TSA PreCheck enrollments just passed the 16 million member mark, with some days seeing almost 20,000 new TSA PreCheck enrollments. This year, TSA is on pace to provide assistance to over 60,000 passengers who may need additional help in our screening process. This program, called TSA Cares, is certainly a benefit to those asking for assistance and provides additional efficiency for all travelers in the queue. I'm very grateful for the funding we received in last December's Fiscal 23 Omnibus Appropriations Act that places TSA employees on the same pay scale as most other federal government employees. This is essential to our long-term success. Annualizing the funding to support this important action is my #1 budget priority for fiscal year 2024. We are already seeing significant dividends from the 23 budget. First off, as many of you have already mentioned, overall attrition rates are down, and they're way down. And there has already been a 53% increase in applications to TSA positions so far this calendar year. I appreciate that in yesterday's markup of our FY24 appropriation, the House Appropriations Committee provided partial funding to annualize TSA's pay plan for our transportation security officers. However, I'm very concerned that the bill does not continue the pay for all TSA employees into the next year. TSA is an operating agency, and all members contribute to our mission success. Here are some examples of employees whose pay would not be funded and therefore their pay reduced in the House bill. You'll see most have a direct contribution to our mission, and the remainder are critical to supporting our front line. Federal Air Marshals, who as federal law enforcement officers provide in-flight security, augment law enforcement presence in airports and surface transportation systems. Canine handlers, whose explosive detection and mobile screening capabilities are a key component of TSA's layered risk-based approach to securing the aviation sector. They are essential to meeting wait time standards at our major airports. Explosives experts are former members of a police bomb squad or military EOD teams that provide advanced IED training and awareness, as well as alarm resolution in our checkpoints. TSA vetting experts work 24/7 to review and vet passenger reservation and aviation worker data while processing nearly 3 million passenger records a day and vet a credentialed population of nearly 30 million people. Coordination Center officers at airports serve as the nerve center for incident management and reporting and are tied in real time with TSA's National Operations Centers. Aviation regulatory inspectors ensure compliance with and the security of domestic and international aviation while assessing security at international last point of departure airports. Our surface and cyber inspectors are similarly not included. Headquarters operations, which consist of only 4% of our workforce, a lean operation in my opinion, provide critical operational, policy, and logistic support to the entire agency. These are examples of the many dedicated TSA security professionals who would be left out of the House bill were it to pass. TSA cannot be successful without a unified, vigilant, engaged, properly staffed, and fairly compensated workforce. I appreciate the challenge of identifying resources needed to continue ensuring transportation security. The current 9/11 security fees generate over $4 billion in revenue to the federal government. However, a portion of this fee revenue has been diverted since fiscal year 14 to deficit reduction. It does not all go to aviation security despite the fee's name. Last year alone, $1.6 billion of the 9/11 security fees paid by passengers were deposited in the Treasury, not used as an offset to TSA's funding needs as originally intended. The President submitted a legislative proposal to end this fee diversion last year and again this year. If enacted, it would provide $1.6 billion in additional offsetting collections to TSA's budget, more than enough to offset the additional costs of fair pay and to support our technology investments. This is an authorization and an appropriation issue. I ask for your support to end the fee diversion and put the funds to their intended purpose as the President has requested. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to your questions and to working with all of you over the coming years to ensure TSA has the authorities and the resources needed to meet our mission. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Administrator. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Administrator, you said that, if I heard you right, that some people will have their pay reduced?
Yes, sir. We start to pay the FY23 omnibus appropriation, authorized pay for every single TSA employee. And all we're asking for and all the Congress provided was pay at the same pay scale as every other federal employee, just about. This pay begins on the 2nd of July. People will see it in their direct deposit accounts on the 24th of July. So that pay is already rolling and moving out. We provided letters to every single employee in the agency in April that showed their current pay and their pay under the amounts appropriated by the Congress in FY23. We did that because we wanted them to be aware of what the exact calculation is. We also wanted to make sure that if there were any mistakes or any misunderstandings, we corrected them back in April rather than in July. So the workforce has been aware since the bill passed in December, and certainly on a personal basis, the personal impact to them by individual letter from us, and then with their direct deposits beginning in, towards the end of July.
Were you saying that in fiscal year 24, some people will get their pay reduced?
Yes, sir. And I would add to that
I mean, actually reduced, not in comparison to somebody else, who reduced.
They'll be reduced, yes, sir. They'll be reduced to what it is today.
They'll get a pay increase for how long?
3 months.
3 months, and then it'll go back down.
Right.
Fair enough. I'd like to get that and see the graph of what that impact would be, please. I don't think we were aware of that. All right.
Sure.
All right. Moving on. Your CT scan, your CT machines, with the increase in funding that was of $30 million, and if we assume that that's going to be continuing, you had originally had a completion date of 2042. Right? With $30 million more per year, et cetera, when is that completion right now?
I believe the completion date, sir, was 2042, and that would probably close it up by a year or two. But we're ready, and we have the ability now with the contracts we already have in place. We already know what technology we want to buy. We've tested it. We've put it in operational use. We can spend up to $300 million just on CT machines.
$300 million right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And this would be $300 million not to put machines in warehouses, but to put machines in airports.
Fair enough. Are you working with outside agency like CLEAR to try to offset some of the operational needs that you may have at the airports?
Well, we work with many, many outside entities, and really that's the strength of our system. We work very closely with airports, with carriers, other providers, and we work very cooperatively with that. I mean, our goal is to make sure that, for me, my North Star is to ensure that we continue to improve security and that everybody in the ecosystem of aviation security and surface security is contributing to that effort.
Move on to Real ID and your timetable for Real ID. What is your timetable for Real ID now?
Sir, the Secretary extended the deadline for Real ID until May of 2024, or 2025, I'm sorry, so it's out a couple of years. We're working very hard to make sure that we hit that deadline date. We work very closely with the states, with the associations that coordinate state activity with departments of motor vehicles, and trying to put a system in place where we provide a gradual level of notification to travelers. For example, let's say for argument's sake, 5 or 6 months out, if somebody comes to our checkpoint, does not have a Real ID compliant driver's license, we orally advise them that, hey, if they don't have a passport, that driver's license cannot be used as their sole identification beginning on the deadline date. And so to really try to get a more personal focus on individuals who have not yet received the Real ID driver's license.
I think it's going to be a problem. I know that my license doesn't expire till 2026, and I don't believe it's Real ID. And the other thing that I do have, so folks that have, say, global entry, and they have an ID card for global entry, I understand that that's not, you can't use that for entry, or can you now?
We have on our website, Chairman, a list of acceptable forms of identification. Most travelers would likely use a passport as a form of identification, which is an acceptable form of ID. If a passenger presents himself at the checkpoint without an acceptable form of ID, we have an alternate resolution process that is time-consuming. And our concern is that if we have a lot of people on the deadline date in 25, it will slow down the process for everyone. That's why we want to get ahead of it as much as we can. We're working very closely with the state DMVs to assess the adoption of Real ID within their new driver's license issuances and trying to keep the messaging out there as strongly as we can.
Fair enough. My time has expired. I now recognize the ranking member, Thompson. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Petoskey, as you know, I recently introduced the Fund the TSA Act, which would provide funding for salary increases and expand labor rights for TSA workers, additional computed tomography machines, as well as critical airport support for law enforcement and canine program. This bill would raise passenger security fees by $2 per one-way ticket, end the diversion of fees away from TSA to the general treasury, which it cost us $1.4 billion annually, and go toward our workers and other improvements. Although no one likes increase in fees, in order for us to really help our workers and maintain this progress that we're talking about, would you support advancing the Fund the TSA Act to secure the funding needed for fair pay and labor rights for TSA workers and other TSA priorities?
Mr. Ranking Member, everything in the Fund the TSA Act are things that we desperately need as an agency. And I think everybody can understand if a person is receiving a certain level of pay in July and August and September, and then let's say for argument's sake, the budget passes at the beginning of the fiscal year and that pay goes down, that will have an incredibly negative impact on the workforce of TSA. Additionally, as the administrator, I would be faced with the challenge of managing two different pay scales within the same agency. One thing that I think a lot of people ought to consider as well is that we have many, many transportation security officers that, fortunately for the agency, advance to different positions. They bring their screening skills, their passenger interaction skills to other positions within the agency. If you don't provide the funding increase across the board, there's going to be less and less of a financial benefit for them to do that, other than career advancement, which many will still do for reasons that are for them a level of professional development. The other thing that I would highlight is you can imagine how hard it is for us in our headquarters positions. If somebody is doing the very same job in TSA and they could get so much more money working for another federal agency, it makes it hard to retain that talent in TSA, particularly in places like Washington, D.C., where it's very easy to switch employers. And so I look at the immediate impact on people, and I also look on the long-term impact on the agency. Other things, sir, that I would add is I have worked, and you and I have talked about this many, many times over the last 5.5 years, of trying to do whatever we can to improve the workplace environment within TSA. I've tried everything, as you know, within my authority and within the funds that we could bring together to be able to put resources to the issue. The number one thing that affects workplace morale in TSA is pay. But the number two thing is the relationships and the manner in which people are led sometimes within the agency. And I think that we've tried everything. Having a full collective bargaining agreement is critically important for us to take that next step and make sure that we have a fulsome way that people can provide input into the things we do. They can provide an assessment of proposals that we make in a collective bargaining environment, and also have appeal rights like every other employee has. So I think those are critical.
Well, thank you much. I think it would be heartless on our part to give people a raise and then take it back. I just think that that's not who we are as a government, and I've never known it to happen in any other agency. So hopefully we'll work something out so our loyal employees won't be caught in the lurch. As you know, CLEAR, as the chairman talked about earlier, operates a passenger convenience program that allow their members to cut in the front of the TSA security checkpoint. But we're also aware of some problems that have come up over the last several months. So can you commit to closing any security gaps that you've identified in this situation?
Yes, sir. I'm fully committed to that. And further, in my view, any security gap that TSA identifies, to me, that's my job, is to make sure that we identify those gaps and close them as quickly as we can. Sometimes it requires resourcing, and that's when we come back to the Congress. Sometimes it might require a little bit of a different authorization, but we need to close whatever security gaps we have. Sir, the strategy that we put out in 2018, the very first thing in the strategy in terms of a strategic goal is to improve security, because our adversaries get better and better all the time. We have to stay well ahead of them.
Thank you. You're back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlemen, his time has expired. I now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pekoski, for being with us today. It's good to see you again. Sure. Your office is always accessible and works very well whenever we reach out, so thank you for your leadership. So discussing budget, we have obviously difficult decisions to make in Congress to protect the people's treasure. We all work at the pleasure of the citizenry that we serve, and we must be focused on good stewardship of the people's treasure. So we're in the same boat there. So on the one hand, I recognize that our nation carries crippling debt. This must be addressed, and very few of us here would argue that the size and scope of the United States federal government was too small in 2022. So we have to make difficult budget decisions, but we're not going to do it at the cost of an American citizen's pay that has been adjusted appropriately to be relatively equivalent to their colleagues in a similar position in another division of government. So it's a moment when we stand united, I believe, on both sides of the aisle to find a way forward there to protect your TSA workers' pay increase. That being said, I'm going to ask you about a couple of areas of your budget and ask you to explain to the American people how you deal with that. Your budget request, TSA's request, included 2 legislative proposals and include terminating the deficit reduction contribution of the aviation passenger security fee and eliminating exit lane staffing by TSO. So the aviation passenger security fee would return $1.56 billion annually to TSA. Currently, that revenue from the passenger fee, which is about $11.20 for a round-trip ticket, is that money is required by statute to go back to the Treasury. We want to return that to TSA. So if we got that done, how would that impact your budget request regarding protecting your people's pay?
Yes, sir. The number correct, $1.56 billion in fiscal '24. That would pay for our pay increase. So it's directly relevant.
Okay, that was an honest answer. My goodness, thank you for a straight, honest answer. The objective would be to move forward with the TSA services that are provided to the people, crucial for the safety of travel, and prepare for the coming years. I mean, you're dealing with 2.2 million people a day. It's a stunning number when you look at it. What you guys are accomplishing is amazing. And you're looking at over 3 million during the travel season this summer, I believe you stated that?
Yes, sir. We should be very close to 3 million. If we don't see it this summer, we'll likely see it
Over
next
3 million a day. So as we look over the next decade, which is the way things are done with budgets up here, we look at 10 years of expense. What kind of volume, from your perspective, could we look at per day in 5 or 10 years through TSA?
Sir, Mr. Hagan, thanks very much for your comments. And generally, a rule of thumb is that passenger volume growth in aviation increases by about 4% compounded year over year.
4% per year?
Year over year, yes, sir.
That's what you've seen historically for growth? Okay. Well, we can extrapolate those numbers and look at significant growth. I mean, it's increasing by roughly half what you're doing now. So you could be looking at 4 million people a day during your busy season within the next decade.
I think that's fair, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, I must say that your office has been excellent to work with.
Thank you.
And we have challenges for budget decisions to make, but I feel quite confident that we'll be able to maintain and grow the capabilities of TSA and protect your workers' pay raise, and at the same time address the seemingly never-ending growth of the size and scope and expense of the federal government. Be more efficient and take care of our people. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired and I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Thanadar.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Administrator, I'm very concerned about the potential impact to TSA's mission if Congress fails to provide funding for increased pay, collective bargaining rights, and necessary staffing levels. I'm glad there seems to be some agreement on the need to maintain increased pay for frontline officers. But we must make sure that any continuing resolution includes an anomaly to continue that funding. And I have several questions, and I'll ask them all and then give you some time to respond. But Mr. Administrator, what would be some of the impacts to TSA if Congress were to fail to fund TSO pay increases in 2024? Mr. Administrator, I'm also concerned about Republicans' efforts to limit pay reforms to TSOs and cut the pay for federal air marshals, canine handlers, and other critical employees. How important are those employees to TSA's mission, and what would be some of the impacts of cutting their pay? And let me continue for another minute or so. I'm also concerned about cuts proposed by Republicans to defund TSA's Visible Intermodal Prevention and Response Program, the VIPER program, is essential to TSA's efforts to support local law enforcement and secure mass transit and other modes of transportation across the country. TSA's surface transportation security efforts are already under-resourced, even though far more people ride the subway each day than fly on a plane. Mr. Administrator, how critical are TSA's VIPER teams in securing mass transit?
Thank you for your question, sir, and I'll go down in the order that you asked the questions. Were TSOs not able to continue the pay that will begin on the 2nd of July? The impact would be devastating to air travel in the country. Wait times in our checkpoints would approach 2 hours without question, and we would also significantly lose an experience base amongst the transportation security officers. I mean, that's something that we saw over the prior 2 years, is that our average experience level was going down by several months in major airport checkpoint operations, which is really not what you want to see. So the impact on TSOs would be incredibly visible and very debilitating for the transportation system. With respect to the others, depending on the extent of the reduction in the number of people that left as a result, we might be challenged for federal air marshals to provide in-flight security. And we have a very risk-based approach for air marshal deployments so that we ensure air marshals are on flights where we know there's additional risk presented. That means that we're going to be accepting a whole lot more risk at 35 or 45,000 feet, which I don't think any of us in this room want to do. Additionally, our inspectors do amazing work with all of the owners and operators of transportation infrastructure in the country. I think we have a very good relationship as a regulator with the regulated parties, and I think we've been very responsible in that regard. And just to acknowledge the owners and operators of these systems, they put a lot of investment into making sure that they meet the requirements that we have, and we would not be able to be as good a partner with them as we are today. We have put out some very significant cybersecurity regulations over the last 2 years. We've been very targeted with this in terms of looking at the most critical owners and operators in a surface and an aviation sector, and also just targeting the critical cyber system. So we've tried to be as targeted as we possibly can be. We would lose a lot of that talent, and we would not be able to provide the cybersecurity baseline support to make sure that our critical transportation systems are protected, and importantly, if successfully attacked, they wouldn't be able to get back on their feet nearly as quickly. With respect to VIPERs, the Visible Intermodal Protection and Response, they have been a really great success story. I mean, there's 35 teams that work throughout the country. They work in support of Amtrak. They work in support of rail and other transit systems. Their name really describes well what they do. They have a visible presence. And our goal is to prevent as much as we can possibly prevent. And that visible presence on the part of an officer is very, very important. We are now providing more VIPER presence in airports to augment local law enforcement in airports. As you know, we have a concern about insider threat across critical infrastructure in the country. Having more presence provides a deterrence, and that's very beneficial. So all of those functions that you described are critical to our success in making sure that the transportation system, which is the underpinning for the United States economy, remains safe and secure.
Thank you so much, and Chairman, I yield back. I look forward to meeting you soon and
Thank you,
sitting
sir.
down.
Appreciate it. Me too.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the administrator for serving for us both our country as Vice Admiral in the Coast Guard and now as our administrator at TSA. And I appreciated joining you and your team not that long ago for that conversation. The TSA, of course, is critical to securing our air travel, ports, highways, transit, pipelines. I'm grateful to the 60,000 federal TSA workers that work hard every single day and are certainly an important line of defense. These workers deserve the dignity of their work to be protected, and that starts, of course, with paying them as the professionals that they are. TSA workers traditionally have been paid lower than other federal workers, and something that you and I discussed, and that's been brought up today at this hearing. We know that this is not acceptable and has a negative impact on quality, on retention, on folks being able to move within the organization, and for security preparedness, which at the very core is the most important. TSOs have been treated also as second-class federal workers in the past, but I'm grateful that there are steps being taken to improve that. The Biden-Harris administration is taking steps, as we know, to remedy this, expanding full Title V employee protections to granting full collective bargaining rights, access to the Merit System Protections Board, and raising pay, all really important for the workforce. The Biden-Harris administration and the Democratic Congress have also made a much-needed down payment last year on pay equity, and now this Congress needs to keep its promise to these TSA workers by fully funding pay equity. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the Ranking Member's TSA Act, Fund the TSA Act, which of course would fund pay increases and collective bargaining rights for frontline TSA employees, while ending fee diversion of the passenger security fee. We all know, of course, that unfortunately the Republican majority has fallen short, in our opinion, in their commitment to TSA workers. While keeping the higher pay for frontline TSO officers, the FY24 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill leaves behind a vast amount of TSA's workforce, and they are being underpaid. Administrator, am I correct that under the marked-up Homeland Security Bill, federal air marshals, explosive specialists, and K-9 officers would face pay cuts that would displace their pay well below similar officers in other departments?
Yes, sir, you're absolutely correct, and I'll give you one example. If you look at the federal air marshals, law enforcement officers, their pay would be cut by 20% on average. That's a big cut.
And just to be clear again, the current Homeland Security bill that has been marked up essentially lowers the pay for many of our TSA officers. And that was a yes answer. That's honestly quite shameful and something that should be addressed by this committee. Am I correct in saying that lower pay and fewer civil service protections typically don't have a positive impact on employee morale and retention?
Yes, sir, very correct. Evidenced by the Federal Employee Viewpoint Surveys for TSA.
Thank you. So I'm not sure why the Republican House majority wants to actually cut the pay of our TSA workers. I'm not sure why they want to actually lower the morale and retention of our TSA workers. Am I correct also that low employee morale and a lack of retention has a negative impact on our nation's security?
It does.
So again, I'm not sure why the House Republican majority wants to actually have a negative impact on our nation's security, but they're clearly doing that through the bill that's been marked up. Currently, the security fee paid by passengers is diverted to the general fund. Could you also just explain for us briefly how this is harmful to TSA worker pay and its technology and security functions?
Yes, sir. About $1.56 billion in fiscal 24 money gets diverted to deficit reduction, which means that that's $1.54 billion that can't offset the funding needs for TSA. It would basically raise our top line.
No, thank you. That's an important answer. Just the last note, just more of a side note comment. I just want to also just commend the workforce. Obviously, this is a very, very hard job. I see a lot of your workforce, of course, going through our airports, in and out of the airports, and I just want to thank them for clearly the adjustments that have been made, especially in the last few years, around treating all passengers with dignity, the bringing in of new technology, which I imagine has been a difficult transition, but the experience, at least I believe, of actually getting through security in the last few years for all passengers, whether it's through TSA PreCheck or the regular process, I think has improved. And I think the technology has actually been a big part of that. And I want to just note that the investments in technology and investing in TSA is not just a security concern, but it also is a customer service improvement for all of the folks that are going in and out of our airports. And just want to thank you for you and your team's work.
Yes, sir. Thank
I
you.
yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Lalota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thanks so much for being with us, and I appreciate all your decades of service in the Coast Guard and now with the TSA, sir. I want to start by saying thank you for doing that, for keeping our air safe, for keeping our skies safe. We appreciate that. A month ago or so, we met in my office. We had a very productive conversation. We talked about the important work that you're doing in the TSA, your vision for the TSA, the safety and security of my constituents and all Americans, and the balance between moving people through airports expeditiously and also keeping them safe. And I look forward to continuing that conversation today, sir. Also, my office last month, we spoke very specifically about the passenger security fee for which all travelers are charged each time they fly. That fee, as we know, is $5.60 for a one-way flight originating in the United States. Nominally speaking, those funds should go to airport security. However, as we discussed, Uncle Sam is taking a large part of those funds to pay for government services having nothing whatsoever to do with aviation security. This is a classic government bait and switch where the government is telling air travelers to pay that fee to make them safer, but it's going elsewhere. A third of those funds, $1.2 billion last year, was used to fund federal expenses having nothing to do with aviation security. That is why I, along with my colleague Congressman Ruppersberger, recently introduced legislation to ensure those funds collected from that fee actually goes towards the stated intent instead of being diverted to unrelated government spending. Administrator, have you had an opportunity to review this legislation, sir?
Yes, sir, I have. Thank you.
And do you have any views or feedback on it, its efficacy, its intent, its mechanics? Do you have any opinions on it, sir?
No, sir, I think it's a great idea. I mean, it's something that really began to be diverted in 2013. Fiscal 24 was the first year it was in effect. Passengers are paying a 9/11 security fee right on their ticket. It ought to go to aviation security, and it would help offset our pay challenge and also allow us to buy more technology. Because I agree 100% that we ought to be able to put the best technology in the hands of our people. We ask them to do a very difficult job. We need to give them the tools to do that.
And especially when we're telling aviation travelers, hey, pay more for this service, I think it's only fair that their government is candid with them and actually use the funds they're collecting for that purpose. So I look forward to staying in touch with you on that legislation, sir. Switching gears in your testimony, sir, you stated that only 38% of computed tomography procurements have been made for a full operational capable need for 2,200 or so CT machines. You've also estimated that based on projected funding as it stands, it will take you until the year 2042 to fully deploy this CT technology. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Can you give me a little insights? I mean, this is concerning, I think, to the committee, and I think that we can do better. Do you have any insights on that, sir?
What I would share with you that's, I think, particularly relevant, sir, is that we're in the position where we know exactly what we want to buy. We've bought a good portion of them already, and we have contracts in place to be able to do that. So we could spend easily triple what we are currently appropriated and not put new technology in warehouses. We could install it in airports. This technology, in particular the CT technology, closes a known security gap for us that we need to close as quickly as we can.
Thanks. I look forward to working with you on both these issues, sir. Appreciate your time today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I'm going to go through a second round of questioning. Mr. Pekoski, what is the cost, additional cost, of giving the pay raises to everybody in TSA?
The additional cost would be the cost for everybody beyond the TSOs, and I'd have to look at the exact budget numbers. The President's request was for an additional $1.1 billion, which is actually less than the $1.6 billion if we ended the fee diversion. So that's in addition to what was
That's not the
appropriated.
question. So I'm asking you a very direct question. What is the cost of giving everybody the pay raise?
Sure. If you provide the pay raise to everyone, the annualized cost is about $1.5 billion.
So, but the President we've only cut $128 million from the President's request. How are we going to fund that?
Well, sir, I think where you start is the fee diversion.
No, hold on a second. The President requested only $128 million more than what we appropriated. How are you going to fund over $1 billion in pay increases with only $128 million?
So the President submitted a legislative proposal to end that fee diversion, and that's to pay for.
Fair enough. That's a good question. That's a good answer. Okay. The fee diversion, how much is that?
1.56 billion.
1.56, and the whole fee diversion is going to pay for pay increases?
It will pay for pay increases and technology investments, sir.
Is that all you need?
Oh, we could spend a lot more money than what's there. I mean, I think pretty much every agency would say that, is that we're top-line constrained, which means that we have far many more very high-priority needs than we have funds to be able to support it. But part of the issue here, sir, if I could, is these investments are long-term investments. Investments in people are long-term investments. Investments in technology are long-term investments. And so you can't wish, let's say in a year we find a significant security concern, a threat, we shouldn't be in a position of wishing we had the technology that we know we need in place.
It's about $11 round trip for an individual.
Right.
What is the actual cost per passenger of providing the services that TSA needs to provide in order to keep Americans and the traveling public safe?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, sir, but we can get that for you for the record.
Would you have a guesstimate?
Well, our budget is, let's say, round up the budget of $11 billion, and let's say on an annual basis you have 1 billion passengers.
Well, the more passengers you have, the more income you have too. I'm asking, so it's a per passenger cost.
Right.
So as your passenger loads goes up, so does your revenue,
It does.
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what is your per passenger cost to provide the services, to provide all your employees a decent rate of pay, and then all the technology that you need in order to keep the traveling public safe in your estimation?
I would have to I'd have to figure that number out and get that number to you for the record. And we'll show you how we calculated it.
Okay, thank you, and I yield back. Anybody? And now I recognize the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here, sir. Administrator Pekoski, I'd like to bring up TSA's work specifically on cybersecurity. On March 7th of this year, TSA issued a cyber-related Joint Emergency Security Program Amendment, EA 2301, for certain TSA-regulated airports and aircraft operators to implement cybersecurity measures. Under this EA, airports and aircraft operators, including Tampa International Airport, which serves many of my constituents, are required to transmit sensitive information to TSA over email. I am concerned that this is potentially putting that very sensitive information at risk in the event of a cyber attack against TSA. All of this information from airports around the country could be accessed by a bad actor. And so my question will begin here. If it is standard practice of TSA, which I understand it is, to conduct extensive on-site inspections of critical cyber-related systems, why is TSA now implementing this process that would require transmission via email of this type of sensitive information for storage about critical airport and airline systems at your site?
Yes, ma'am, great question, and we benefited significantly from the input from our airport and airline partners on this, and we have changed that policy where they can keep that information locally. We'll inspect it locally.
That is great to hear. And in fact, you just led into one of my other questions. I would love to hear more about that. What kind of engagement did you have with the stakeholders in the airports in making changes or revisions to that policy?
I would say, and the airports and the carriers would be a good group of people to ask as well. I think we have a really very productive and positive relationship with the owners and operators of critical infrastructure, airports and airlines, very much included in that category. And we have regular dialogue back and forth all the time. We understand the concern. We looked at it carefully. We think we could provide some mitigations for it, but I didn't want that issue to be the issue that prevented us from making progress on improving cyber protections and improving cyber resiliency. And so, fair point. Let's just go to the site and look at the data that they have there. It makes sense from my perspective, and really, I value the fact that airports and airlines feel that they can come back and say to us, no, hey, we disagree with that. And importantly, we will listen to what they say, consider carefully what they say, and generally we provide an answer that I think at the end of the day, both of us walking away would say, that makes sense, and let's just move forward.
So just to be sure that I'm clear, so then at this point, that is no longer the requirement, that they take that information and email it to TSA for storage there?
That's correct.
All right, very good. And tell me generally, what policies and practices does TSA have in place for itself to protect in the event of a cyber attack or incident?
Yes, ma'am. And one of the president's executive orders is to make sure that the federal government leads in this regard, because many of us are placing requirements on private sector entities and other levels of government entities. And so we wanted to make sure that we were setting the right example in that regard. And so we are moving aggressively to put a zero trust framework in place around all of our cyber systems. We've increased our cybersecurity training. We've brought more cybersecurity experts on board. And I think that, at least in my experience working with pipelines and rail systems, airports and airlines, we have all collectively learned a lot in this process. And so I think the transportation sector is so much better off now 2 years later than we were when we first started putting these requirements in place. I'll give you one classic example. Back in May of 2021, we didn't know how many cyber incidents were occurring in the pipeline sector or in the rail sector or in the aviation sector. Now we have a reporting requirement, so we know. So if somebody gets attacked, they can call back to CISA, which is an important point because that's the central repository for that reporting, which has worked very well, and understand that, hey, I might not be alone here. There are others that are experiencing the same things, and to help them contextualize what's going on.
And if you would elaborate on that last point, I'd love to hear more about the way in which you're working with CISA and some of the successes and utility that you've gotten out of the relationship with CISA.
Yes, this is one of our key. We have really two key partners overall. One is with CISA. The other is with the Department of Transportation, because DOT has the safety side of the transportation sector, and oftentimes something that you might do for cybersecurity from a security perspective might have a safety impact that you're not mindful of, or vice versa. So we work very closely with DOT, the modes, FAA for aviation. The pipeline has this material safety agency for pipelines, and also with the FBI from a threat perspective. So it's a very, very good relationship. And one of the things that we want to be able to provide to our industry partners is a more unified perspective on the part of the government agencies that are involved.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I recognize the gentleman from Louisiana.
Administrator Pekoski, referencing what we discussed a moment ago, the aviation passenger security fee. Let's visit that again. It seems to me that that would be a game changer for TSA to have that money returned, correct?
It would, yes, sir.
And there's a lot that we could get done within the parameters of a conservative budget projection if you had that money returned to TSA.
Yes, sir.
I concur. And it occurred to me, based upon your projections for increased traffic per day, moving from 2.2 million a day, which is, again, hard to believe that you guys handle that amount of traffic, but it's true. And you're looking at over 3 million a day in the peak of the summer travels, you're saying. So if TSA received the aviation passenger security fee, which currently for a round trip ticket's $11.20, and granted everyone is not traveling round trip that would come through, but we could project a large increase in your daily and monthly income to fund TSA operations if you receive that fee. Because as traffic goes up, you have a TSA security checkpoint has a relatively static expense, whether it's busy or not, correct?
Right.
So if you increase the number of passengers, you have the same expense for operating the TSA checkpoint, give or take maintenance expenses, et cetera. But with the static expense for operating the TSA checkpoint, if you're able to receive the aviation passenger security fee back into your funding, especially considering increased traffic, when you won't have increased expense to operate, but you'll have increased funding because of the increased traffic. Am I seeing this correctly?
Yes, sir, you're seeing it correct. The only thing I'd add is that your maintenance costs will go up with more traffic sometimes.
A little bit.
But not, your core concept I 100% agree with.
All right. Well, again, sir, thank you for appearing before the committee today. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, and I'm going to just, one more round for me, okay? All right, how many passengers a year do you process, domestic passengers?
I would have to get back to you with the domestic number. I know the overall number is close to $1 billion per year. We're at $550 million already this year, so we will easily exceed $1 billion by the end of this calendar year.
Okay, $1 billion, okay, let's say it's $1 billion, so it's $1 billion at 560? $1 billion at 560, because 1 billion passengers, that's wherever, going, it's 560.
560.
That's just not. So you're getting, $5.6 billion from your passenger fee. What does it take to fund your agency?
About $11 billion. Sir.
11 billion. So it's half of what it actually takes to fund your agency. Okay. One more thing. Of the 1.6 billion that's actually being diverted, you said that you could pay for the pay raises and also technology. How much is it for pay raises?
The additional fund we need for the pay raise is 1.1, because we already had money from FY23 appropriated, so the increase is 1.1.
Well, then I have another question, okay? My figures, it says it's 856 million to pay for the pay increases for the rank and file. You're saying it's more money to pay for the non-rank and file? It's more expensive to pay for those folks than it is for just the bulk of the rank and file?
No, sir, what I'm saying is that we were appropriated about $380 million last year for pay. That is in our base, so that carries forward into '24. And when you go into '24, you just ask for the increase that you need to be able to sustain full-year funding for that pay. That increase is another $1.1 billion. So that gets you to the 1.4 that I talked about.
Well, you had it for a quarter,
Right.
okay? And so you need 856 to fill out the other 3 quarters, or a quarter. Yeah, no, it'd be about 300 million. 300 million per quarter? Is that what you got?
380, yes, sir.
Okay. So 380. So is cost just as much to pay for the upper echelon folks in TSA as it does for the rank and file?
No, sir, that 380 includes everybody.
No, you said you would take $1.1 billion to pay for the pay increases for the folks that aren't getting the pay increases. Is that what you said?
No, sir. The 1.1 is to annualize, to take the 1 quarter funding and turn it into 4 quarters worth of funding in fiscal '24.
For everybody.
For everybody, yes, sir.
We gave you $856 million additional for the rank and file this year. All right? So if you say that the base for that is already in, and then you say, okay, it's $1.1 billion for the rank and file, but you're telling me it's $1.1 billion for the non-rank and file. And what percentage of your workforce is the non-rank and file versus the rank and file?
Sure. Sir, the transportation security officers, the uniform workforce, is about 80% of our workforce.
The TSA, the people that are getting the raise.
Yes, sir.
So how could 20% of the workforce end up paying costing just as much as the 80% of the workforce?
Right, because that money that provides for the TSOs needs to be carried over for 4 quarters worth of funding into '24. So you're paying for that as well.
No, you're not getting the question. You're telling me that for 80% of the workforce, you need $1.1 billion. But you're also telling me that for 20% of the workforce, you need $1.1 billion. That doesn't equate to me.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, for the entire workforce, to annualize what we received in '23, we need an additional $1.1 billion.
But you're already getting $856 million more in this next fiscal year to pay for your 80%. So how much more do you need for the 20% that you say are getting a pay cut? You're telling us it's $1.1 billion. To me, it doesn't equate. Okay, so
We'll figure out the number.
well, no, I got to figure it out because you know what? It doesn't equate to me. So if you got 20% of your workforce is costing as much as 80% of your workforce, there's something wrong.
384. Yes, it's 1.1 minus the 854. Yeah, okay. So we have 380. We're asking for 1.1.
You have 380, and we've given you $856 million more to fund for the 80%. That's in this budget, okay? That's in our appropriation. We've asked the question a number of times. If you got the passenger fee back, 1.6 billion, how much of it, how much of it do you need to fund the other 20%? And you give me a number like 800 million or $1 billion, okay? Doesn't make sense to me. How 20% of the workforce can cost as much as 80% of the workforce. And if that's the case, that means your 20% is making a heck of a lot of money. So where is it? Where are we?
So the non-TSO workforce does make more money than the TSO workforce does. They're higher banded. So if you looked at the rest of the federal government, they would be, let's say general schedule 12, 13, 14 steps, where the TSO workforce would be 5, 7, 9, maybe 11.
Okay, so you know what? Now I'm gonna need who's making what,
Sure.
okay? Because that doesn't make sense to me, okay? That 20%, no matter how much, if they're making a heck of a lot more than everybody else. So I gotta see what that is, okay?
Sure.
And so I need to see those folks that you're saying that are gonna get a pay cut, what are they making? And how much total are they making, and what percentage of your workforce it is? And then the ones that are getting the pay raise, which is 80%, right? How much are they making? All right, and so, look, I want to be fair with everybody, but again, I want to make sure that I got this whole thing straight.
I understand. If I could just add one comment to that, sir, is that we're asking for the people to be paid at the same level that their other federal counterparts are being paid. We're not asking for money that other people working in the federal government don't receive for the same grade level.
I understand that, but, I ask questions a certain way because I expect them to come out a certain way. And I don't expect your answer to come out a certain way, but I expect, okay. And when I see something like that 20%, according to you, maybe you're wrong, I don't know, 20% is costing as much as 80%, there's something wrong there, okay? So, I gotta check that out. Okay. My time is over, but I'm the chair, so I can do whatever. Mr. Higgins, you have any follow-up on this?
Just an observation, perhaps, Mr. Chairman, for your line of questioning here. In the interest of just clarity, I believe that what TSA was dealing with is that it's not that the 20% of the workforce was overpaid, it's that the 80% of the workforce was underpaid. And we're adjusting that now, and it does bring parity to those numbers, but again, to use your numbers in the interest of simplicity, the 80% of the workforce was falling in the lower one-third of comparable pay bands across the federal government in similar jobs. And the 20% of the workforce was falling in the upper one-third of the pay bands for similar jobs across the federal government. So it puts them in the upper one-third, it doesn't put them at the top. And so it's not that 20% of the workforce was overpaid or is overpaid, it's that 80% was underpaid. And we've made those adjustments. Is that a fair summary, sir?
That's fair, yes, sir.
Productive meeting and hearing, Mr. Chairman. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and it has been productive. I do want to see those figures,
Sure. Happy.
and look, from my perspective, maybe the traveling public needs to have excellent services, which you provide, and then, what they pay for, they should be getting the services that they're paying for, and so I agree with my colleague. I thank the witness for a valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members in the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witness to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.